Good evening, all. Thank you all so much for coming. My name is Patty Roberts. I'm the Deputy Director here with the City of Port St. Lucie Parks and Recreation Department, and I am honored to be here before you with tonight's fourth session of HealthyU. This is a series of conversations on challenging topics which affect many of us. A few general housekeeping items, please. At the registration table, there is a voluntary sign-in for anyone choosing to do that. So please, if you choose to, leave your name and contact information. Lastly, let's cover, restrooms while we're here in this building. You would go out these doors, out these doors and turn left, and that's the restroom facilities. Please feel free. Our staff did a great job with the, I've got food and coffee and water service, okay? So please help yourself to that. And lastly, there will be an opportunity for questions and answers of our subject matter expert. For those attending via Zoom, feel free throughout the session to enter them into the Q&A. For those present in person, and thank you guys for coming down in person, we'll save that opportunity to the end. So you will have everyone will have an opportunity to ask questions. But I just wanted to say HealthyU is a program that is very near and dear to my heart. The topics that we've been discussing in this series of conversations over the past 4 months are ones that are very real and sensitive in nature. And I recognize that. We have covered depression, anxiety, domestic violence. Tonight is trauma-informed care. Next month will be suicide prevention. And the last in this series is substance use disorder, okay? We have actually, and I'm thrilled to announce, that we have received approval to extend this program because of its success throughout the year 2021. And we are going to be offering monthly, again, starting in May, again, topics through the services of a subject matter expert on really interesting and I think challenging topics that are affecting all of us. The first one in May is going to be on bullying. There is a session on dementia. There's a wide variety of very sensitive, challenging topics that we'll be presenting throughout the next year. So I'm just thrilled about that. We are really hearing some great things from the community that this is helping, and so we want to be there to serve. My point on, and that's why I'll go a little bit into my personal story, is I'm a firm believer that if we don't talk about these topics, the issues remain lurking and diseases remain untreated. And I do have a very personal interest in exploring many of the topics that we'll be discussing. Just 909 days ago, and yes, I do count in days, my son, Danny Roberts, died from a heroin overdose that was laced with fentanyl. Danny died right here in Port St. Lucie. He was 22 years old, and he had fought for 8 years with his battle with addiction. We as his parents were right there with him throughout his entire struggle. We fought for him, we fought against him, and we fought with him. But the outcome remains the same. Danny is dead from this horrible disease, and I miss him with every breath I take. But looking back on Danny's struggles as he sought treatment at more than 14 rehabs and recoveries along the way, I did tell you he was a fighter. He was diagnosed with depression, anxiety, and bipolar disorder. Once, when he was in remission, which is my term, meaning that he had been sober for more than 2 years among the 8, he and I had a great conversation when I opened the dialogue with, what do you think came first, the mental health issues or your addiction? And Danny thought long and hard on that before sharing his response. He felt strongly that the mental health issue, for him, it was anxiety. That was what presented itself first, was first. Then he began to self-medicate. As his mother, I didn't see it. He was very active in sports right up through his freshman and sophomore year in high school. and I didn't see the anxiety and depression that he suffered. And for that, I harbor deep regrets. So, you see, that's why I'm here, to learn more about mental health issues so that I can help others who may be in need. Do I believe Danny suffered trauma in his 2 short years? Absolutely, without a doubt. There's no question in my mind. Can I pinpoint it to the actual trauma that he suffered? Maybe. I think I can. It had impacted his sobriety and gave him a propensity to self-medicate with the drugs. And as a voracious reader, I know too well of the countless families that are truly impacted, and some devastatingly so, due to trauma that they or their loved ones have experienced. And now, throughout these days of COVID-19 and just prior to the pandemic, the world in which we live in is moving faster than ever before. Technology has exploded, and our means of connectivity is vastly different from how our parents before us connected and interacted with society. Many of us, due to circumstances outside our control, feel isolated and unconnected with our loved ones, our colleagues, our associates. And this can and does leave us feeling depressed, out of touch, and with a weary outlook on life in general. Anxiousness has become our very way of life as we wake up each morning not knowing what our day will be like given the pandemic. Finances, food security, housing, employment, all prove to be huge factors that can heighten and exacerbate anxiety in us all. And amid all this depression and anxiety, trauma and the way we deal with trauma must be discussed. Being in the middle of a pandemic heightens those emotions, and they aren't always expressed in a healthy manner. And that's why I'm so very proud of each one of you joining us today to talk about this very tough topic, which is trauma-informed care. So today, it's my extreme pleasure to share with you an important message from a someone dear to my heart, a subject matter expert on the topic of trauma-informed care, Dr. Anushka Marshall, Director of Prevention Services with Tykes and Teens in Palm City, Florida. I do want to share a bit about Dr. Marshall's credentials and background. They're absolutely outstanding. But I want to mention Dr. Marshall returns here tonight after her powerful December HealthyU presentation, when she shared with us all of her expertise on anxiety. So, Dr. Anushka Marshall is a licensed clinical psychologist and certified addictions professional. She received her doctorate and master degrees in clinical psychology from the Florida Institute of Technology. Dr. Marshall has worked full-time at Tykes and Teens for 15 years. Since that time, she has spent her career providing psychotherapy services to children and families of Tykes and Teens with a focus on teen issues and substance and alcohol abuse. Dr. Marshall has also maintained a private practice since 2010 supporting adults' mental health needs. Dr. Marshall has been a guest lecturer for various psychology-related graduate and undergraduate courses. She is an adjunct faculty member at Kaiser University and has consulted on various community task forces. Currently, as the Director of Prevention Services at Tykes and Teens, Dr. Marshall is in charge of overseeing and developing a series of activities geared toward prevention of mental health and substance abuse issues for children. Such projects include community psychoeducational seminars, workshops for mental health professionals, social awareness campaigns, overseeing classroom-based prevention curriculum, developing free and fun activities for tweens and teens in the community, such as the Tykes and Teens Mindfulness Yoga Series, and much more. What drives her work is the motivation to help contribute to the creation of an overall healthier community, because at the end of it, we all benefit from that. So, without further ado, may I bring forth Dr. Marshall.
Thank you so much, Patty. And thank you so much for having me tonight. I always love opportunities to educate the community. And I absolutely commend you all for being here on a Friday night. So I promise it will be worth your while. I'm going to talk about one of my most favorite topics, which is trauma-informed care. In our agency, we actually, this is a part of a full series that we take on the road and provide to schools, organizations, and help them become more trauma-informed. And with that, they are able to interact differently with the people that they serve and improve their overall outcomes. So I'm very, very happy to share on this topic today. So I want to start off by asking you all, what would you do if you had an extra 5 hours in your day? Think about that. Wouldn't that be a beautiful thing, right? What would I do with the extra 5 hours? What about an extra year? Extra year to do whatever you wanted. What could you use that for? Might go eat, pray, love for a year, right? Or maybe 5 years. What would you do with that? What an incredible amount of time, you know? And we don't know how much time we have, but we can imagine with those extra times how we can use that. And I'll get to the relevance of this toward the end. Sorry. Okay. So for tonight, my objectives. Sorry. I need to figure out appropriate way to point. So tonight our objectives are to talk about what is this trauma-informed care thing, what is the psychological impact of trauma or perceptions, overall long-term impact of trauma, what is healing-centered engagement and why does this matter to us or in our community, trauma-sensitive schools, and action steps. What can you do to start being a part of this movement? And it truly is a movement. This probably isn't your first time hearing about trauma-informed care. 5 years ago, it might have been, right? So, which is very exciting to me. So when you think of trauma, a lot of people might have different ideas of what that may include. Here are just kind of a cornucopia of what we talk about when we talk about trauma, that it's not just one thing. It could be a community thing, like violence within the community. It could be a household matter, or it could be a cultural matter. And to think on, well, what actually is trauma? When a person is traumatized, what is that? And I want you to think of it in terms of like a tree in a hurricane. So a palm tree in Florida may have to endure the stress of a hurricane force winds, correct? And that stress may be sustained or acute, meaning consistent, right? So, or maybe short bursts of that, 150 mile per hour wind hit. The trees bend to the wind and they try and adjust. Every tree is different. At some point, that tree might snap. And at that point, we say that the tree has been, quote unquote, traumatized by the stress of the hurricane. This is where some people get a little confused. We don't want to, the incident is not the trauma. The tree is not now the trauma. The trauma is where the tree's ability to withstand that stress had been compromised. And so that is what we consider to truly be trauma. The tree's ability to withstand the stress of the wind was overwhelmed, resulting in injury. So that is kind of the, the metaphorical way we encourage individuals to think about trauma, that an individual's natural ability to withstand has been compromised, and that has produced a, for lack of better words, an injury, right? There's different types of stress. Positive stress, so those are those brief heart rate increases, and it's temporary. It's actually good for us. So a good example of positive stress could be you have to present in front of some people, and on Zoom, you have a camera pointed at you. That might be that good stress, but that good stress allows you to be alert, allows you to be present, allows you to think through. So that's an idea of good stress. And then there's tolerable stress. That's the things that may happen to us that we don't have power over, and they stink no matter how you slice it, whether it's a death in the family, whether it's an injury, physical injury that a family member member endured. But what happens is that this is tolerable because an individual is comforted through the connections and the love that they might experience through either their community or their family members. So it's tolerable, they heal, all is well. And then there's the toxic stress. And this is more prolonged and sustained, where an individual never gets an opportunity to just, right? And perhaps the community or the family members, they may not be there in the way that is needed in that moment. So again, so stress, not necessarily when we talk about stress, to not lump too many things in there, because there's so many different nuances of what stress truly is, and it's not all bad. So why do we care about trauma-informed care? Well, because it has been known to, again, like I said, improve outcomes with people that we serve, reduce critical incidents. So, for example, an individual in a perhaps hospital facility might be able to reduce a situation with a patient that is starting to get escalated, and instead of that patient hauling out and punching somebody, perhaps that incident didn't have to happen because someone was aware of this type of technique and how to manage. Reduces the stress and burnout of individuals because they're not constantly banging their head against the wall of how do I get to these people, and not having the skills to be able to do that, and reduces escalated incidents where these higher emotions doesn't need to get there. A good example of that is many years back, we saw this in the news. It was a young lady who, now unfortunately we see it a lot in the news, young lady who was sitting in her classroom chair, and an officer had picked her up and slammed her down. I don't know if you guys remember, right? And it was all started with, she didn't want to give up her phone. So you want to, so what could have happened there, right? What could have happened to make that not have to escalate to that degree? With a trauma-informed care lens, what the individual could know is that that young lady was in foster care. That young lady had been in foster care for a lot of her life. That cell phone was her only connection to people that she trusts and cares about, and the teacher's asking her to give it up. So you can imagine that might cause some resistance. Now, the situation escalated where the teacher had no choice but then to contact a law enforcement officer, and law enforcement officer's job is to have people comply, right? So again, I'm not blaming the teacher, I'm not blaming the officer, I'm not blaming the young lady. What I do want to talk about is, that lack of knowledge, that lack of understanding of how this could have been different. And I think it's all our responsibilities to know that. So Lincoln High School is one of the incredible schools that has wholeheartedly adopted this modality into their being. And since they have, as you can see, that has had a huge impact. I'm not going to read all to you as you can see it, but again, it improved outcomes. And what is involved in trauma-informed care is a culture shift. Recently, I saw this wonderful meme that I shared on Facebook that said, "Be kind to unkind people, they need it the most." And I truly wholeheartedly believe that. And with trauma-informed care, and this is the metaphor I like to use, so bear with me here. I'm going to take you through an imagery. So if you want to close your eyes or lower your gaze or relax your gaze, and allow me to invite you to imagine yourself on the greatest vacation that you've ever been on. You are so relaxed, you're a million miles away from any troubles in your brain. You have your eyes closed, you're sitting by the pool, everything is perfection. And then suddenly you get a giant splash from the pool. What might be your initial emotions or thoughts? Anybody? What is that initial emotion might be? Like, here I am relaxing and I get splashed from the pool. Startled, yeah. Other thoughts? Angry, right, angry. Someone's messing up my mojo here. Someone's messing up my chi, right? So let's say you open your eyes and that splash was because someone was drowning. So now there's a different outlook, right? Now you feel differently. Now what your intention is different. So when we think of those individuals that sometimes are not as kind, when we think of those individuals that sometimes get very aggressive and loud, or just, might cause trouble, or those little ones that might be aggressive, loud, and, sometimes cause trouble, is that to not look at them as, why can't this, they're ruining my time here, right? Instead, looking at them as they might be drowning in their stuff. So how can I be helpful in this moment? How can I support? How can I throw a life preserver to that person, right? And that is what trauma-informed care is all about. So it goes from the old idea of what the heck is wrong with you? Why are you this way? To what happened with you? I want to understand. It goes from the idea that every person's or children's behaviors that are difficult are purposeful and intentional, to the idea that a lot of those responses are actually automatic and there's very little thought involved in them. Children, the old view that children do well if they want to. Well, if they just wanted to be, behave more, they would. Children do well if they can, if they have the capacity within them, the skills, the internal abilities. And it's a movement from trying to fix that individual, but more focuses on how can we shift this environment to have it promote this wellness a little bit more. It goes back from the idea of, you're traumatized, go see a professional, you need counseling, to this person is traumatized, we all kind of need to come together, support that youth or individual who has been exposed to trauma. It is our shared responsibility because it affects us in a way. So that little child that, might be troubled in school and then gets, kicked out as a teenager, who gets involved in illegal activities in our community, is going to eventually affect you, right? So this is why it is our responsibility, and this stuff does matter. So I want you to pause for a second and think about, do you know a child like this? Do you know a child that, goodness, it makes you wonder, like, what is with this kid? Like, I don't understand. Like, no matter what we do, that he's so difficult, or an individual. It might be an individual that you work with. It might be an individual within your family, your spouse's family, So think about that individual. Have that person or child in your mind for a moment, and hold on to them as we go through. So again, going from what's wrong with you to what happened, I want to understand, and then even further to healing-centered is what's right with you. It's an incorporation of the positive psychology. And positive psychology came into the field kind of in the, early 90s, because they felt that that the field of psychology was focused too much on the diagnosis. Like, too much on the diagnosis, too much on the problem, too much on, what's wrong, without consideration that, well, heck, this person made it this far somehow, they're still alive. So let's figure out how they did that. Let's figure out what strengths there are to empower that individual. And that, again, is a further movement from trauma-informed care to healing-centered. And in that focus on the whole of the individual, not just the harm the person experienced, on what the assets they have versus the deficits, and that trauma is not the individual's experience, but a collective experience, because again, we all get splashed with that person's experience. And again, trying to focus most on what's right versus what's wrong. And positive psychology, it does do that. So what are the pieces of it? Well, having an open heart, having empathy, being vulnerable in your own responses, teaching the individual to dream, to be bigger. A lot of children, perhaps, that have a trauma, they can't see past high school, or perhaps they can't see themselves or see that college might be a possibility, or even, moving away from an area is a possibility. So broadening their view of what could be. Analyzing, policies and practices within the agency that is serving the individual to see, how can this be modified? So one example is one of our programs is trauma-informed care is within the after-school programs that Children's Services Council of St. Lucie funds. And what we try and encourage that the staff does not suspend the youth that are doing wrong, because what happens is that they suspend them into sometimes a bad situation, and that does nobody good, right? So what we try and do is to move some of those policies aside. So at the last resort, that there may be a suspension because, they're limited as well sometimes too, but to shift some things that from, being like black and white. So that's an example of like a policy change to support that individual and taking loving action toward the policies and practices. So again, let's embrace this child that's doing bad instead of kicking him out and, taking a breather from him or her and throwing them back into a situation that is, again, making things worse. So this is a video about the still face experiment, and what I want you to think of this through the lens of what happens early on when a child might be born into a situation where a mother is depressed, let's say, right? And that could be in any socioeconomic level, right? Depression runs the gamut. A parent who maybe is not present or works a lot or is on their phone a lot, through the lens of a child that might be in a poverty situation where there is violence and so on and so forth. So I want you to think about that as you hear what they have to say in this video through that lens. Could you play that?
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In this still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby who's about a year of age.
I'm my good girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this, and then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, come on, why aren't we doing this? Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it, they actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly situation.
So if that doesn't break your heart a little bit, right? When that little baby was just like, pay attention to me. So again, thinking about what the implication of this is when you think about a mom that might be depressed, right? When you think about a child growing up in poverty, where that child doesn't receive that, and what they call it is a serve and return, because that serve and return helps that little brain grow. That serve and return helps that little brain and body feel safe. So when it doesn't exist, there is a disruption. So during the first few years of childbirth, there are neural connections being made every second and again, even more so, that serve and return is so important. They even did studies where children that are read to more often, their brain actually develops faster and they're able to read earlier. So there was a huge movement in Martin County called, I think, 1,000 Words by age 1, where they encouraged moms to just read to their children. So again, this process of developing is fueled by that serve and return. And infants and young children naturally reach out for that interaction through their babbling, as what you saw there, and that engagement. But without it, without that appropriate response, the interaction from a caregiver that builds those connections, the architecture of the brain changes, is weakened, and it's different. So again, going from the what's wrong with you to what happened to you is so much more important. And going back away from that, well, if that kid just wanted to behave, he would. Well, it's a little bit deeper than that. And here's, now, plasticity, I just want to make a mention about this. So it doesn't mean that, all is done, that, if that child experiences that in their early life, that's it, we're done. But the brain can actually repair itself in a lot of good ways, which is why I like to think about trauma-informed care as like healing little brains. We teach, our infant mental health program goes into a lot of the early pre-K programs to teach the staff how to, be trauma informed, because, a population of their children may perhaps have experienced trauma. So again, let's not suspend these little biddies, right? A 2-year-old should not be suspended, but let's work with them. Let's heal these little brains. And that's why I love trauma informed care and thinking of it that way, like healing little brains. So here's a profound example, again, the implications. So on the left-hand side, there is the healthy brain. And on the right-hand side is a brain of a child that has been through abuse. As you can see, on the left-hand side, there's a lot of energy and activity happening in that frontal part of the brain. I mean, the whole brain is lit up like a Christmas tree, but a lot more so in that front part of the brain. And what do we do with our front part of our brain? We have higher order thought. We have problem solving. We have higher order thinking, right? So it's all that stuff that if I do A, then B will happen. Well, maybe I shouldn't do A, right? Now, this other brain, where do you see the abused brain? Where do you see it lit up the most? It's not lit up like a full Christmas tree, right? And their most activity is in that hind brain. So a hind brain is your primitive fight, flight, survive, right? So when that child that has been through trauma is, having that tantrum and a teacher's trying to ask them, what's going on? Well, that child does not know what's going on, right? So it's important to create a space where that child is safe, allow for some kind of, de-escalation, so remove things that might be triggering it or allowing it to escalate, and then having that conversation later on, or perhaps providing some skills for that child of soothing and calming. So again, moving away from that idea of, well, if they could, they would do it, right? But they really do need us to help them do what they need or what's theirs to do. So when you have a healthy brain, you have all sorts of great internal controls. You're able to regulate your emotions. You're able to use the full function of your brain the majority of the time. You're able to understand consequences. If I do A, B happens. And you care about what others might, think of you, again, because you're using the full frontal part of your brain. But individuals that that have been through trauma, since their brains aren't built that way because there is some disruption, they need those external cues to be able to self-regulate themselves. So as they get those external cues, so those external cues might be to be mindful and to pause. It might be a lot of coaching. It might be connecting with people that they know and trust, and have to be somehow motivated to be able to use those controls. So they look externally on cues too, let's calm, versus individuals that have healthy brains can do that internally on their own. So what does trauma-informed care do? Well, A, it does what you guys are doing today, is that it realizes the prevalence of trauma and taking a universal precaution approach that, we're just not going to be kind to the people that are kind to us. We're also going to be kind to those that are unkind because they need it the most. It recognizes how trauma affects individuals, as you just saw in the brain, and we're going to go into additional repercussions as well. And it responds by putting the knowledge into practice. So, maybe I'm not going to raise my voice when that kid raises their voice or that individual raises their voice. Maybe I'm going to lower my voice a little bit and start really, being loving and caring in that moment. Resist the temptation to re-traumatize. And again, that's allowing your anger to take over in that moment and why is this person ruining my time, right? And then it renovates the environment with guiding principles. So with places and organizations that try and be trauma-informed, these are kind of the main 6 principles of what this is all about. So creating an environment of safety, so that means staff and people, not just physically, are not going to harm me, but they're not going to psychologically harm me. So no one's going to call me stupid in this program. No one's going to shame me because I didn't bring my sneakers. So that's the safety. Trustworthiness and transparency. I know that that adult isn't going to tell me that they're going to do something that they don't plan on doing, so I'm going to trust them. Peer support and mutual self-help. So the individual is going to coach them on how to use positive skills, and they're going to empower them that they can help themselves as well. Collaboration and mutuality, that's more about understanding that the healing does happen between, within a relationship. It doesn't happen like on its own. And it's an idea that we are a team, we are together, we are here to work together. I'm not, I guess, what's a good way to put it? Like, not necessarily I'm, the authority figure and, and fear me, but more of like, we're buddies, we're a team. I am going to keep you safe, but, we're going to work together. Empowerment, voice, and choice. So ensure that the individual does have some control over the things about the program or about their own care. So like, for example, well, it's homework time. So do you want to work on your math or do you want to work on your spelling? Your choice, right? Because a lot of times with individuals that do have trauma is that power and control is huge for them because they so seldom do have that power and control. So it's very easy to get into a power struggle with individuals such as that. And being, all-inclusive culturally, historically, gender-wise. So going back to the plasticity of the brain, we can instill resiliency in youth. And our founder, I should say, our old CEO, but our founder, he liked to talk about dandelions and orchids. Some kids are dandelions, some kids are orchids, right? So orchids need that extra love and care, or their leaves are just going to fall apart, right? Versus that dandelion is going to bust through that cement to grow, right? So because not all children are those dandelions, we can support them in building their resiliency so maybe they won't punch through that asphalt, but maybe they'll at least not fall apart when the wind blows, right? So the availability of this one stable, caring adult is one of the most important things. And sometimes that's all a child has, but it is such a tremendous impact. And I always tell this to staff at Boys and Girls Club or any kind of mentoring programs that, as long as there's one person in staff or Parks and Rec, as long as there's one person, a part of the staff that can connect with this kid, that this kid can trust, like there's hope here. There is absolute hope here. A sense of mastery over life circumstances. So that means, again, allowing choices where appropriate. Strong social connections, emotional skills such as problem solving, self-awareness. So that's all life skills building, which a lot of programs do. Affirming faith or cultural traditions, so being knowledgeable about that, and keeping environment safe, supportive, and engaging. So again, going back to, I know this person isn't going to call me a jerk. I know that I'm going to be physically safe and psychologically safe. So again, this is just repetition of the previous, just because these are like the building blocks, the foundation to it all. The being engaging, being the safe individual, being supportive in an unconditional way. Now that doesn't mean like, step all over me, no consequences, but that does mean I'm going to understand what that is about, and that isn't about you trying to ruin my day. So when we do this in a lot of school settings, and again, settings where there's where staff is taking care of youth. So we ask them to think about, a child that might have physical symptoms all the time, headaches, stomach aches, and doesn't take care of themselves. Think of one of the children, in your program that has intense feelings, and it seems that the feelings are always huge, and they're constantly, trying to, feel safe. Or that kid that's aggressive and has frequent outbursts. Or that kid that has difficulty controlling how they're feeling, and anger goes right to, from 0 to 100. Trouble having relationships with other peers, like they're constantly in fights with their fellow classmates, more likely to be suspended or expelled. Didn't mean to do that. Okay, difficulty paying attention and learning, because those are some cues as to perhaps trauma is really occurring here. Now, that doesn't mean that all these things always mean trauma. We'll again move as we go further. I'll share with you what are indicators that this truly may be trauma, with how a child might respond to consequences of behaviors. And again, going back to, why does this matter to us? And, Patty always shares her story, and she's so brave to always share her story about her little boy. I always say, he's always going to be your little boy, right? Yeah. And I think about, our community and how with this opioid crisis that we'd experienced, and, we're still trying to fight it. And I don't know how many people know this, but I know in the field we know this, is that the majority of individuals who have an addiction, there's a high percentage of those individuals that have a trauma background. I think it's about 80%, and more so actually in women as well. So my idea is that perhaps if we could embrace this trauma-informed care, perhaps we can heal individuals and heal so our community doesn't have to work this hard to, prevent a crisis like the opioid crisis. And I love this video because it's a different way of viewing addiction. Could you please play that for me?
What causes, say, heroin addiction? This is a really stupid question, right? It's obvious, we all know it. Heroin causes heroin addiction. Here's how it works. If you use heroin for 20 days, by day 21, your body would physically crave the drug ferociously because there are chemical hooks in the drug. That's what addiction means. But there's a catch. Almost everything we think we know about addiction is wrong. If you, for example, break your hip, you'll be taken to a hospital and you'll be given loads of diamorphine for weeks or even months. Diamorphine is heroin. It's in fact much stronger heroin than any addict can get on the street because it's not contaminated by all the stuff drug dealers dilute it with. There are people near you being given loads of deluxe heroin in hospitals right now. So at least some of them should become addicts. But this has been closely studied. It doesn't happen. Your grandmother wasn't turned into a junkie by her hip replacement. Why is that? Our current theory of addiction comes in part from a series of experiments that were carried out earlier in the 20th century. The experiment is simple. You take a rat and put it in a cage with 2 water bottles. One is just water, the other is water laced with heroin or cocaine. Almost every time you run this experiment, the rat will become obsessed with the drugged water and keep coming back for more and more until it kills itself. But in the 1970s, Bruce Alexander, a professor of psychology, noticed something odd about this experiment. The rat is put in the cage all alone. It has nothing to do but take the drugs. What would happen, he wondered, if we tried this differently? So he built Rat Park, which is basically heaven for rats. It's a lush cage where the rats would have colored balls, tunnels to scamper down, plenty of friends to play with, and they could have loads of sex. Everything a rat about town could want. And they would have the drugged water and the normal water bottles. But here's the fascinating thing. In Rat Park, rats hardly ever use the drugged water. None of them ever use it compulsively. None of them ever overdose. But maybe this is a quirk of rats, right? Well, helpfully, there was a human experiment along the same lines, the Vietnam War. 20% of American troops in Vietnam were using a lot of heroin. People back home were really panicked because they thought there would be hundreds of thousands of junkies on the streets of the United States when the war was over. But a study followed the soldiers home and found something striking. They didn't go to rehab. They didn't even go into withdrawal. 95% of them just stopped after they got home. If you believe the old theory of addiction, that makes no sense. But if you believe Professor Alexander's theory, it makes perfect sense. Because if you're put into a horrific jungle in a foreign country where you don't want to be, and you could be forced to kill or die at any moment, doing heroin is a great way to spend your time. But if you go back to your nice home with your friends and your family, it's the equivalent of being taken out of that first cage and put into a human rat park. It's not the chemicals, it's your cage. We need to think about addiction differently. Human beings have an innate need to bond and connect. When we are happy and healthy, we will bond with the people around us. But when we can't, because we're traumatized, isolated or beaten down by life, we will bond with something that gives us some sense of relief. It might be endlessly checking a smartphone, it might be pornography, video games, Reddit, gambling, or it might be cocaine. But we will bond with something because that is our human nature. The path out of unhealthy bonds is to form healthy bonds, to be connected to people you want to be present with. Addiction is just one symptom of the crisis of disconnection that's happening all around us. We all feel it. Since the 1950s, the average number of close friends an American has been steadily declining. At the same time, the amount of floor space in their homes has been steadily increasing. To choose floor space over friends, to choose stuff over connection. The war on drugs we've been fighting for almost a century now has made everything worse. Instead of helping people heal and getting their life together, we have cast them out from society. We have made it harder for them to get jobs and become stable. We take benefits and support away from them if we catch them with drugs. We throw them in prison cells, which are literally cages. We put people who are not well in a situation that makes them feel worse and hate them for not recovering. For too long, we've talked only about individual recovery from addiction. But we need now to talk about social recovery, because something has gone wrong with us as a group. We have to build a society that looks a lot more like Rat Park and a lot less like those isolated cages. We are going to have to change the unnatural way we live and rediscover each other. The opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. This video is a collaboration with Johan Hari, the author of the book Chasing the Scream, The First and Last Days of the War on Drugs. He was very kind to work with us on this video to spread the word. We recommend that you give the book a try. Our videos are made thanks to your support on patreon.com. If you want to help us make more of them, we really appreciate your support.
So I find that video a little inspiring, right? It kind of warms your heart, like, ooh, like we all have power, like we all can do something. Absolutely. You know, and I know it sounds a little kumbaya, but I like the kumbaya stuff, right? And what a beautiful, you know, alternative way to look at addiction, and so much more hopeful, that it really is about connecting and being kind and coming from a place of love to these individuals, and even before that even gets to that point, right? So I do want to put this disclaimer out there, because some people are like, well, then, you know, we're just going to let people be, you know, jerky to us, and we're just going to let kids run amok. No, I'll get to that. But what trauma-informed care isn't, it's not a way to view people as victims, like, oh, poor them, we have to love them. It is not enabling or promoting negative behaviors. It is not about coddling these individuals. It's not about taking responsibility off of them. You do there are repercussions for negative, for negative behaviors. So again, this is my disclaimer. We're not talking about just coddling. It's just a different framework and I guess shifting what to do. So like, for example, going back to that young lady that I mentioned about not giving up her phone, like really how important was it for her to give up her phone in that moment? Could that teacher in that moment kept teaching, right? Maybe after class, addressed the young lady and said, look, you didn't give me your phone. The consequence is going to be this because you didn't give me your phone. But on the other hand, what's going on? How come you didn't give me your phone today? Like, what do I need to know? Can I help you? Yada, yada, right? Because in that moment, was it really that big of a deal, that phone, right? Could this been handled? And again, that young lady could have had a consequence, right? That didn't involve her getting, slammed into the ground. She could have had a consequence because she didn't follow through, but that, again, could have been dealt with in a different way. So again, not getting into that power struggle and still holding individual responsible. So going back to how do I know if this is trauma or if this child perhaps just has a behavioral issue? So if a response is greater than what is expected, so kind of like losing it if a shoelace breaks or losing it if milk is spilled, right? If a behavior appears compulsive, meaning that regardless of what consequences happen, like that child or individual just doesn't care, like they are in that moment, and you can punish them 6 ways to Sunday and that person's not going to, it really isn't going to matter. The behavior appears to be done in a mindless way, like there's no talking to the individual. The behavior persists despite interventions focused just on the behavior. And the reason why this is because the individual is being triggered by these things in the environment, perceiving that there's a lack of control. So, again, someone's going to take my phone away and I have no control over this, right? Unexpected changes or transitions, feeling shameful, feeling vulnerable or frightened, feeling threatened or attacked, intimacy or positive attention sometimes even can be triggers. So again, it's all activating that survival part of the brain, that part of the brain that was lit up in the previous slide. So unpredictability, being overloaded or overstimulated with things that are going on, perhaps a lot of shouting or a lot of things going on at the same time, feeling vulnerable or frustrated. So the teacher's above me and waiting for me to finish my paper, and suddenly the kid stands up and flips their desk. Well, what just happened? Well, it wasn't the teacher standing there, it was the being trigger of that experience and what that experience started to provoke within the individual. Confrontation. The other piece that I want everyone to know is that because an individual experiences a trauma event, that doesn't mean that they're going to automatically have terrible PTSD. There is a wide spectrum. An individual can be, going back to those dandelions and orchids, right? An individual can be generally okay after a significant trauma event, all the way to an individual having severe health concerns and having a lot of post-traumatic stress symptoms. So it's a very, resiliency is so important and people are so different. So, so why do people might respond to us in a particular way, right? When we're just trying to be helpful. So here, and I like using this example. So let's say you are at Publix and you pay for your groceries, you walk away, but you don't realize but your bank card was left with the grocer. So the cashier realizes, runs over to you, and grabs you by the shoulder. So if you've generally grown up in maybe a loving in a loving household where touch is generally a positive, loving thing, what might you do? Turn around and see, or you might be thinking, oh, someone's getting my attention, right? Or trying to get my attention. You turn around, here's a cashier, here's your bank card. Oh my God, isn't the world a safe, lovely place, right? So let's say that that isn't your experience. Let's say that touch always meant something painful, something awful, and usually resulted in some kind of injury, and someone's grabbing you by the shoulder. So you might not even have a thought there, but if you do, it might be like, who's messing with me? I'm about to be harmed. So you're either going to turn around and be aggressive back, right? Let's say you turn around and punch the person out, or let's say you run away, that fight or fly, right? So if you're giving aggression to that individual, what is that individual going to do? Might give aggression back, right? So now the situation is escalating, and why is this person in my face right now? Like, why do people have to be such jerks? Or then let's say you run out of that place because someone was grabbing you because you wanted to be safe, and then you realize, I don't have my bank card. Oh my God, someone stole my bank card. The world is such an unsafe place. So because of these experiences that build these beliefs and these responses, the way the person responds in their environment, if people aren't responding back or pausing, a lot of times it keeps recreating that same belief. Does that make sense? So again, you're running away because you didn't, you're thinking, I need to run. This is unsafe. I don't have my bank card. Oh my God, the world is such an unsafe place. I got to watch my back. Versus, someone's trying to get my attention. I turn around. Oh my God, this person's handing me my bank card. What a wonderful place this world is. So the individual's responses sometimes provoke things that continue encouraging that belief of the world not being a good place or the world being a lovely place. And that's just a reminder of flight, fight, freeze. And so again, the front of the lobe is a learning thinking brain. That's the healthy brain that has not been, through a lot of abuse, that it works really hard. And then the alternative, the brain that has been through a lot of abuse, is responding more in their limbic system, which is more of their a feeling center. And again, fight, freeze. That's tough to say sometimes. So the physiology of it, and I don't want to bore people too much. Sometimes people don't like to talk about this part. So that amygdala, which is a part of that limbic system, is like a little almond shape. It's very deep in the brain, and it is responsible for survival. Again, going back to that primitive, part of the brain, and it tags memories with emotions. So that's why a lot of times when trauma happens, the memory, the way that memory is stored in the brain is kind of like a shattered piece of glass, where people might be responding to things and not realizing they're responding to things in a particular way, versus a safe, healthy memory is like a complete like a complete piece of glass that's safely stored and filed away. So those shards from that trauma are scattered through the brain sometimes, and that's why individuals sometimes respond or might not even have the words to express why they're having this kind of a response. And after trauma, it gets caught up in this high alert system. So you're already at a 9 because your brain's learned to stay at a 9 because it's been activated, that limbic system, and that limbic system keeps us safe. So if you're already at a 9, it's, a 10 isn't, that far away. It's just a hop, skip, and a jump. And the hippocampus, that is the part of the brain that an underactive hippocampus, that the frontal part of the brain, can increase the stress hormone that's happening in our body, which of course, as you know, having a lot of that stress hormone in your body is not good for our bodies. It keeps the body, both the body and the mind, stimulated and reactive, and neither has ever or gets a message to calm down. So that's when that front of your brain doesn't get stimulated enough. So that constant elevation reduces the body's ability to self-regulate. And again, the whole system is, as you can see, impacted in this way. So it's not just a psychological impact, but that physiological impact. So what you see in trauma are these 3 basic symptoms, or I guess categories of symptoms. You're going to see avoidance, repetition, and anxiety. So avoidance, you're going to avoid people that are similar to who has hurt me, places that are similar to where I've been hurt, and actions that have previously maybe preluded something that was unsafe. So an example of that is, our staff used to come into the Hibiscus Center and support their staff in supporting their youth. And there was one youth who would just always have a breakdown at dinner time. And they looked at this, and despite whatever consequences that child had, it would always be a breakdown. So they looked at, like, what is happening? What is this individual being triggered by? So they looked at the staff, like, well, is this different staff in the night? No, the staff is the same staff. Is it the food? Is it the particular food that he's having? No, he might have the same food for lunch that he had for dinner, and no response. So what they did was we encouraged them to look back in the child's record, and what they found was that the child's abuse occurred during hygiene time at night. So what happens at the shelter after dinner? We go do hygiene time at night. So what that child was doing was actually avoiding hygiene time, because that was a time that was unsafe. So what the staff had done is asked the child, what do you need to feel safe when we have our hygiene time? And it was interesting because when I think of being in the bathroom, to feel safe, I want the door shut and locked, right? Well, this child didn't, because he wanted the door ajar, because that was his way out. It was shut and locked previously. That was not safe. And again, that's why we have to have these conversations and discussions, and change that environment to help support the healing of the trauma. So the child was able to have the door lightly ajar. Staff members stood outside the door, so no one would, of course, come in. And the issue stopped during dinner time. So again, it wasn't that we didn't hold the child accountable. We just worked with the child to figure out what was happening here and why was this being triggered. So that's an example of, again, that avoidance and what that may look like sometimes. Repetition. We see people engage in repetitive behaviors when they have been traumatized. So I forget the name of this artist. Do you know the name of this artist, Patty? Gustav something, I think. Well, in any case, so that's the famous painting, The Scream. And if you've seen any of this artist's other work, it is actually very similar. He always paints these very yellowish, gaunt faces, elongated, but if you look at the individual's history, he actually lost his siblings and mother to tuberculosis. And what happens during the late stages of tuberculosis is that you end up having this jaundice look, and of course, loss of weight. So you see these images in his artwork. The same thing with Stephen King. Stephen King in his early work, I don't know if you've noticed or read any of his books, but he talks a lot about trains, and trains sometimes being the monster. There was a train in Stand By Me, by the train tracks there was a dead body, and you see it in a lot of books, and I forget which were the other ones. Well, what people may not realize is that he actually lost a friend who was hit by a train when he was really, really young. So again, you may not notice, but these, and we see this in child's drawings as well that have been traumatized, where they keep drawing the same thing or the same, theme of something. They play the same theme. We had it was a kind of a sweet story. Again, our founder had this case with this little girl who experienced a hurricane for the first time, and she was having all these anxiety symptoms. So what she would do over and over again in the office is she would take the stuffed animals in his office and invite him to hide under the desk with her, and they would play, let's hide. And she would do this over and over and over again until she started, lightly doing other things. Well, let's just do this in half of our time together, and the other half, let's color. So what the child was doing was being able to process through her play, the fear and the anxiety that happened through that experience. So it's really, and sometimes you see that in relationships where, individuals that might have gone through abuse or abusive relationships keep entering these types of relationships, and people wonder, what is wrong with you? Well, again, that can be that repetition of that trauma of needing to process what happened through your relationships, where you keep choosing these individuals that put you in that situation so that you can process that in your brain. And anxiety, and we all know symptoms of anxiety. So now going back to that individual you had placed in the back of your mind. Any thoughts come to you? Any bulbs light up for you, or any feelings that you might have different now when you think of that individual? A little bit. Just something to consider. I think, well, yeah, okay. Let's play this one. Just trying to save for time. Yeah, sure. I might have you pause it early. Is it early before?
Are you sleeping restlessly,
No.
feeling irritable or moody, forgetting little things, and feeling overwhelmed and isolated? Don't worry, we've all been there. You're probably just stressed out. Stress isn't always a bad thing. It can be handy for a burst of extra energy and focus, like when you're playing a competitive sport or have to speak in public. But when it's continuous, the kind most of us face day in and day out, it actually begins to change your brain. Chronic stress, like being overworked or having arguments at home, can affect brain size, its structure, and how it functions, right down to the level of your genes. Stress begins with something called the hypothalamus-pituitary-adrenal axis, a series of interactions between endocrine glands in the brain and on the kidney, which controls your body's reaction to stress. When your brain detects a stressful situation, your HPA axis is instantly activated and releases a hormone called cortisol, which primes your body for instant action. But high levels of cortisol over long periods of time wreak havoc on your brain. For example, chronic stress increases the activity level and number of neural connections in the amygdala, your brain's fear center. And as levels of cortisol rise, electric signals in your hippocampus, the part of the brain associated with learning, memories, and stress control, deteriorate. The hippocampus also inhibits the activity of the HPA axis, so when it weakens, so does your ability to control your stress. That's not all though. Cortisol can literally cause your brain to shrink in size. Too much of it results in the loss of synaptic connections between neurons and the shrinking of your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that regulates behaviors like concentration, decision-making, judgment, and social interaction. It also leads to fewer new brain cells being made in the hippocampus. This means chronic stress might make it harder for you to learn and remember things, and also set the stage for more serious mental problems like depression and eventually Alzheimer's disease. The effects of stress may filter right down to your brain's DNA. An experiment showed that the amount of nurturing a mother rat provides its newborn baby plays a part in determining how that baby responds to stress later in life. The pups of nurturing moms turned out less sensitive to stress because their brains developed more cortisol receptors, which stick to cortisol and dampen the stress response. The pups of negligent moms had the opposite outcome, and so became more sensitive to stress throughout life. These are considered epigenetic changes, meaning that they affect which genes are expressed without directly changing the genetic code. And these changes can be reversed if the moms are swapped. But there's a surprising result. The epigenetic changes caused by one single mother rat were passed down to many generations of rats after her. In other words, the results of these actions were inheritable. It's not all bad news though. There are many ways to reverse what cortisol does to your stressed brain. The most powerful weapons are exercise and meditation, which involves breathing deeply and being aware and focused on your surroundings. Both of these activities decrease your stress and increase the size of the hippocampus, thereby improving your memory. So don't feel defeated by the pressures
right
of daily
there.
life. Get in control of your stress before it takes control.
Just trying to be aware of time. Next one. I think it's that one, yeah. I think it's there. Yes, thank you. Okay, Dr. Felitti, I believe his name is, he, and when I heard about this study, I wanted to scream it up there on the hills and make sure that everyone knows this. So he did something pretty extraordinary. He had a weight loss clinic, and what he found, and was doing a study on weight loss, and what he found was that so many individuals who were successful didn't stay successful, and he wanted to figure out why this was. So he took those individuals and he asked them a little bit more questions. So for example, with one woman, he had asked her, when did this weight issue begin for you? And she was like, oh, well, maybe around 12 years old. He said, oh, did anything significant happen when you were 12 years old? And she was like, yes, I was sexually abused. And he was like, oh my goodness, I've never known anyone that was sexually abused. Well, guess what? He was wrong. He knew quite a few people that actually had abuse in their lives. And he wanted to see, well, what kind of impact did this truly have, on people? So in this Kaiser Permanente study, they did 17,000 participants, and they asked them a series of questions that of what we call ACEs. So that's adverse childhood experiences. So I want you to put in mind too, these individuals were primarily white, upper middle to upper middle class, college educated, and access to health care. So they, had benefits and things like that. So I want you to think about it, with that lens. So he had asked these individuals, have, any of these things happen to you? So these are the adverse childhood experiences. And this is how, within that population, it looked. 11% said yes to psychological abuse, 28% to physical abuse, 21% to sexual abuse. And then there's the household dysfunction category. And finally, the neglect category. So this is the percentage out of that 17,000 of individuals who experience this. And isn't that interesting? Like individuals that, seem, pretty much like, they have access to a lot of good things, correct? And this is how many each of them had. So some 33%, only 33% had nothing, none of those, could say, nope, none of that happened to me. 33%, that's not a big number, right? So that means that the majority of those individuals had at least one or more adverse childhood experience. So what does that mean in our society, right? And it actually means a lot, because you'll see what this actually correlates with. So individuals with 4 or more actually have a huge impact in their lives. So these individuals that have adverse childhood experiences are more likely to smoke, be dependent on alcohol, 12 times more likely to attempt suicide, 7 times more likely to become an alcoholic, twice as likely to have heart disease, more likely to have multiple sex partners, which of course comes again with additional consequences, more likely to have additional marriages, more likely to have unwanted pregnancies or abortions, experience intimate partner violence, may experience sexual assault. And here's, oh, darn it. Let's see the rest of the slide. So individual, I believe it's COPD and smoking. So the purple is individuals, I believe, with 4 or more of those ACEs. So again, you see the more of these adverse childhood experiences you have, the more likely you will have certain negative health outcomes. And so this is kind of the trajectory of what happens. So child experiences, adverse childhood experiences, any one of those, and I think there's 10 in all, well, then their brains are disrupted and their development of their brain is disrupted. So you're asking this child who, may have not had dinner, may have heard mom and dad, yelling at each other, may wonder if later on that child's going to be, beat, and now he's sitting in the classroom and being asked to take a quiz. Right? Seems kind of ridiculous. And again, I'm not, blaming anybody, but again, when you think about it in that terms, it's like, ooh, we might have to look at this a little bit. So obviously that's going to affect their socialization, their emotions, and, how well they learn. And if you are experiencing difficulties with socializing, if you're experiencing learning difficulties, you are likely to adopt some unhealthy behaviors. They show that that youth actually with ADHD symptoms, for example, who are diagnosed with ADHD are actually at more risk to use drugs and alcohol because, some of the struggles that they have, again, socially or, in the classroom, they, have a tendency to want to, calm that and want to feel better about themselves. And, drugs sometimes make people feel better about themselves. So as they adopt unhealthy behaviors, what happens? It takes a toll on your body. It takes a toll on your psychology. And I think one of the most profound impacts is that individuals with, again, 4 or more adverse life experiences actually live 20 years less than your average Joe. So that's a lot of years lost, right? So it seems sad to see like how this kind of all goes downhill. However, I still feel hopeful in that, being trauma informed and the more places and organizations that adopt this trauma informed care, perhaps we can lessen this trajectory and maybe move it a little off course, which we are hoping for. So again, realize that trauma happens. And again, from that Kaiser Permanente study, remember it was the majority of individuals had at least one or more adverse childhood experience. Recognize how trauma affects the brain. It affects the development of the brain. And then, of course, all the fantastic things that the brain is supposed to do, it's not going to be able to do as well. Responding in a different way to those individuals, resisting that response of, oh, why are you ruining my time? And trying to renovate the environment with those 6 guiding principles, as I mentioned before. So what can you do today? What can you do when you leave here? Connect with the youth, either through a mentoring program, whether it's a connection with your church, maybe an after-school program, volunteering. I know Big Brothers Big Sisters are always looking for individuals, but sometimes just that one caring adult is all that child really needs. If you are, working in a particular place, whether it's, in the humanities field or not, think about, some policies that there are that might be harsh for individuals, or think about maybe coworkers or individuals that that are struggling with certain rules, and, is something happening here? Asking individuals that, are troubled, or youth that are troubled, like, I wonder how, what has happened. Individualizing interventions. So like, for example, in a classroom, we invite teachers who are seeing that their child might have those indicators, are seeing that that child is, responding in this big way to something little, and all those other things that indicate that the child is being triggered, that, maybe that individual we want to do, call them the leader of the class, because that gives them a sense of power. And, well, why isn't little Jimmy having this opportunity? Well, maybe we can rotate the opportunity, but this is, something that's going to be valuable to this other child. So validating emotions and people's experiences. We have a tendency of, perk up and it's not so bad. Well, it's okay if someone's having an emotion, right? And it's important to validate that it's okay to have that emotion. It's okay to, have negative thoughts sometimes. Sometimes, a person wants to hear, I hear you, I get it. Refer for, particularly with children, you may not want to refer an adult, although sometimes maybe you do want to refer adults. Sometimes you may want to say, have you thought about, getting some support for yourself, And again, particularly if you are in the humanities field, avoiding burnout. So being sure to take care of yourself. And when you are working with a youth, we don't want to force them to talk about it. We want to find out what is making them feel unsafe, create some kind of a safety plan, not downplay. We want to validate. So don't worry, everything will be all right. Well, it may not always be all right. Make sure you honor all commitments, look at other options, does, Jimmy have to do math during, homework time? Can he start with something else? And offering those additional choices, and help them think about positive ways to keep busy, incorporating positive hobbies. Sometimes children don't have access to, positive things in their lives, so the more that they do, have something to connect with, the less likely they'll connect with, something negative like drugs or alcohol. And again, I'm not going to go through all these, but these are just some examples of proactive steps that teachers take. Again, we do a lot of this with the school districts and within different settings such as that. So these are some examples of some real practices that some schools adopt. Restorative justice circles. So what happens is, let's say, for example, two youth fight, and instead of perhaps getting suspended, what they do is they'll come into this restorative justice circle, and it's a circle with their peers, and they talk through like what happened and how it impacted all the other students and what is a better solution to this. So because what studies show over and over again, which drives me nuts, is that suspensions don't work. It's a pipeline to the jail system, and it drives me nuts. And we actually at Tyson Teens have the Alternative to Out-of-School Suspension program, where kids that are suspended in Martin County middle or high school can attend our program for free, and we do skills building. So again, teaching them, how to self-regulate and things like that. We have a restorative circle where we ask them to kind of process what happened and why, they were suspended. They get to work on their homework, so they're not missing their work. They get free time, so they get to play basketball, and then they get to volunteer and read or help little elementary school kids on their homework. And our program is actually 70% of our youth that attend our program do not get resuspended. So wouldn't it be great if we did this like everywhere, right? So that child isn't just home playing video games the entire day. And sometimes something incredible happens where, we've had, again, two children that were suspended because of a massive fight that they had. And the parents are calling, they're like, is that kid going to be there? Because I don't want my kid if that kid's going to be there. Well, okay, so you're going to have your children go their separate ways, and what's going to happen when they come back to school, right? Nothing's resolved, but what can happen within our program is that those kids can talk. We can facilitate a good conversation here. We can, figure out a way that these kids, that this doesn't happen again. And it may be just as simple as, just stay out of my face. Okay, well then just stay out of my face. Okay, fine. But at least they get to have that conversation and that experience. And that's kind of what restorative circles are about. Having calming corners, and in that calming corner is just an opportunity for the kid, again, to have those cues to self-regulate. So again, a student might be invited to, this is a funny story. So we have a suspension, we used to have a suspension prevention program in Indiantown Middle School, where a youth, instead of, who had a propensity of being suspended a lot throughout the year, attended this course. And one of the little boys had come in. It was a boys group and a girls group, and one of the little boys had come in, and she had a calming corner, and the first thing he did when he came in the room, he put down his stuff, he went to the calming corner, he did crisscross applesauce, and just kind of meditated and breathed. And the other little boys were like, what is he doing? And then they all started doing it. And so they all kind of learned about meditating and how, but how great that kid did that to kind of regroup from what just happened in Mrs. So-and-so's classroom, right? That sometimes that those things can be so powerful that it doesn't always have to be like, okay, get your books out. You know what I mean? Because having done that is going to make that kid so much more ready to learn than, okay, now, I know you had that situation with Mrs. What's her name, but, I need you to open your book right now. So these are check-in cups. So these are great because, again, it helps teachers know where the child is at. So, like, for example, the child comes in and grabs a popsicle, depending upon what's going on inside of them that day, right? So if that teacher knows that child grabs that orange popsicle with that orange face on it and sets it on his desk, that teacher knows, not to, again, we're not coddling these youth, but to be, maybe ask, hey, how you doing today? Is there anything that I can do for you? And to not get into that power struggle where, for example, maybe I'm not going to fight over this cell phone right now, right? Because I don't know what just happened in that household. I don't know what happened yesterday, but that kid's telling me, I'm having a moment, and and then the teacher doesn't have to re-traumatize the situation. behavior reflection charts. So these are after the fact. Like, let's say the child had a huge blow up. They get to complete this with the teacher. So what poor choices were you making? Why were you making these choices? How are you going to change and make better choices? What would a fair consequence be if you, anytime to make, I'm sorry, can't read that. In any case, but that last question is really important because it's, what do you think are fair consequences? So you're inviting them to contribute to that. And sometimes, honestly, kids are worse when they come up with their consequences. And sometimes they come up with things that like you wouldn't even think about. Like, really, that matters to you? Like, yeah, take it. And it's like, okay. But yeah, so again, that sense of power and control can be so important. And that's just an example of a calming space, peaceful place, calming corner. I hate using the term safe space because I feel like has had such a negative connotation about it, where it like is very connected to the idea of, oh, we're coddling the world. Well, no, then let's stay away from that. Let's call it a calming, place. And again, just some steps to ensure that if you are in that field, that self-care is very important, because sometimes we can feel powerless because the same thing happens over and over again with some of the people that we work with, some of the youth that we work with. Like, maybe Johnny isn't throwing his chair every day. Maybe he's just throwing his chair twice a week. But sometimes that can still, weigh heavy on us. So, importance of self-care. So Texan Teens has a live binder of resources. There was a period of time where we actually closed it. So we close it and open it depending upon how we are working on it, but it just offers additional resources. Here are some online resources to learn more. So going back to what I first said, what if you had 5 hours? What if you had a year? What if you had 5 years? Remember going back to that individuals with adverse childhood experiences live a lot less than individuals that have, come from very nurturing, lovely backgrounds. So when we are implementing trauma-informed care and using some of these skills and looking at individuals, especially youth, through this lens, we are adding time into their lives, right? So just want to end with this video real quick.
I probably would make a time machine.
I would make medicine for the sick.
I'd probably invent something new.
我会赢到5个总冠军戒指。
If I could have an extra 5 years to live.
You said 5, right?
5 years.
It's a long time.
I would try to fix everything I did bad.
I would bring my uncle back because I miss him very much.
I would get more hamsters.
I would probably want to go looking for dark matter.
I think I'd go looking for aliens.
If I could live an extra 5 years.
I was thinking about making like a helicopter, like a wooden helicopter, but I don't have any wood.
I want to go check out the moon sometime. I'd probably teach my sister not to hate tuna.
I would try and invent a machine that lets you run at light speed.
If I had 5 more extra years to live,
I would be the boss of all the chipmunks.
Eu cantaria na frente de 1 milhão de pessoas.
I don't really know. I think I'd do anything. Why are you asking me that?
So that always gets me, and hopefully this has inspired you to learn more or to share with maybe some after-school programs that you think could use this kind of education, or encouraging your schools to, engage in this kind of education. Again, it's not just about the children, but also being a little, kinder to those people that need it the most, right? And looking at them through a different lens. So I think that takes me to the end, if there are any questions. Oh, thank you.
Are there any questions from the in-person? Let's go with that first. Okay, none. The question, if I may, because of Zoom. Okay, we have a question in person. If Dr. Marshall would make her slides available to the group.
I can make the information available, but because of us producing this program, we have to just be careful of how it being out there in the public, and individuals that might be teaching it that don't know the background. So we want to make sure that people are getting the knowledge through us with our materials. But I can get some materials to you that are same education.
Anything else from the in-person? Okay. I have something in the chat box here. Great workshop, very engaging and personable presenter, and bravo.
Oh, thank you.
Woohoo! All right, let me just close up the evening, if I may. I do want to say that was so informative. And I loved the C word, and that is what I'm going to talk about a little bit before I close. And this will not take long. Trust me, it won't. But the people ask me all the time, why HealthyU? Why Parks and Recreation and mental health? And the sole reason that this program was even born, if you will, is because of connection. And Dr. Marshall just covered it. I saw it with my own son, that when someone is experiencing mental health issues, they withdraw, and that's part of it. They don't socialize. They know that what they're doing, they know right from wrong. My son did, but are unable to move past that. So that's why Parks and Rec is here, because we offer a plethora, and I'm not here to sell my programs, to sell my fitness memberships. That's not why I'm here. I'm here to simply show the public. And if people in person did get a copy of this, but I am showing on my, if I can, on my screen here. I know. I am going to share my screen. And there we go. If nothing else, please consider looking through the Parks and Recreation Inside the Outdoors. It's our annual publication. It'll just give you an idea, A through Z, of everything that Parks and Rec does offer. And you'll note at the end is a section that contains the A through Z guide. And everything we do here, whether it's a special event, a fitness program, athletics, a golf lesson, or youth programming, is done with the mission to get our residents connected in whatever form they feel comfortable with, so that our community is unified and given the necessary tools to thrive, whether it's through a global pandemic such as COVID or otherwise. Before, during, and after the current global crisis, your Parks and Rec team has been and will be hard at work for you, and we appreciate the opportunity to present just a glimpse into what we have to offer. And I truly hope and thank each one of you for taking time on a Friday night, like Dr. Marshall talked about, to become better informed people. And that's, I know I'm walking away with more than when I walked in at 6:30. I'd like to also welcome you to session 5 of HealthyU, where we will discuss with another subject matter expert the topic of suicide prevention. That will be a very tough conversation, but again, in my opinion, so badly needed, especially right now. That session will be held here in this very same room and offered similarly through Zoom on Friday, March 12th, from 6:30 to 8. And I truly hope to see you there. And as always, in closing, the Parks and Rec Department is honored and privileged to have the daily opportunity to provide this community with parks, amenities, and programs which increase the quality of life and enable our residents and ourselves to learn, grow, and serve every day. Thank you all for coming. You are all brave people, and thank you so much.